Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jensen, and Module 2, Crime, Criminality, and the Media, Part 6 is here. This is your last video for this module. Yay! So you'll be finishing up today. This will be a little bit shorter video, just bringing forward some of the research results that we have about the media and crime connection, specifically focusing on fear and on crime TV shows. So this shows you some of the evidence that we have out there and what it all means. So first, realize that fear of crime is really important in its own right. We don't want to dismiss it or minimalize it. It matters. It's also related to other important phenomena like changes in your lifestyle, not going out, avoiding activities and places or even people because of paranoia or trauma or anxiety that you have about that. And those are very real and legitimate challenges for people. There are crime prevention strategies that come out of our fear of crime, ranging from costly alarm systems or security measures to guns and neighborhood watches or citizen patrol and so forth. And so they actually do contribute to that. They also influence changes in attitudes or politics, especially punitive attitudes, because of wanting to get rid of this uncomfortable emotion called fear. So fears are multidimensional. Fear can be worry or fret or anxiety that again can have a very impairing effect. Fear can be risk of victimization where we feel insecure. Fear can be concern about the social problem of crime where we are preoccupied with the safety of others. And these dimensions are not necessarily correlated. So for example, young minority males in the ghetto may acknowledge that they live in a high-risk neighborhood for victimization, but they don't worry about it. It doesn't kind of control them day to day. They're aware of it, but they try to navigate it as best they can, living in an area that's challenging but not disruptive of their lives. So media and generating fear, given media portrayals about crime being highly predatory and violent, senseless, having undeserving victims, and all the things we've talked about in this module, we might expect media exposure to relate to the fear of crime, driving that fear, making it higher, intensifying it. And in this module, you were asked to read the Dowler study. So this is survey research on the National Opinion Survey on Crime and Justice, which was a random telephone survey. And this study had 3 different dependent variables. They looked at fear of crime and your worries about 7 different types of crime. So fear as an outcome of being exposed to certain things. They also looked at another dependent variable or outcome of your own perception of police effectiveness on crime. And another outcome they were interested in seeing was predicting your own punitive justice attitudes based on these experiences. So it was really a great study to use for this class and kind of a classic study. So we wanted to expose you to it. So the predictors of fear and your perception of police effectiveness and how punitive you feel in your own attitude were these primary independent variables: being a regular crime show viewer, using a crime news source, and the number of television viewing hours that you spent per week. Like how much time are you spending on TV watching? Then control variables were mostly dealing with location and the social structure. So we had race, if you lived in an urban or a rural area, your marital status, your income, education, age, level of neighborhood problems you experience, to see if those are also potential indicators of why you have fear or why you have the experiences and perceptions you do. These are what the findings came out to be for the Dowler study. So what's interesting is only crime show viewing actually related to fear of crime. So there was a relationship between crime show viewing and having fear, but it's a very weak relationship. More crime show viewing, it tended to predict slightly more fear. So it is there, but it's not this amazing money variable that is like the explanation of the universe. It's not very strong. So in many cases you would find it, but there are other things that would predict it even better and have more explanatory power than just crime show watching. But there was a relationship. Other media exposure measures really were not related, not significant. Media exposure measures unrelated to perceptions of police effectiveness and to putative attitudes. And so watching crime TV shows, how much TV you watch, using crime news sources, really didn't predict whether you thought police were effective or not, or how punitive your attitude was. So there was no relationship between that. So really, fear of crime only weakly predicted more punitive attitudes and perception of lower police effectiveness, but not media exposure. So media exposure doesn't generate those perceptions, but the fear can. And so you could say, okay, maybe we have like a mediating effect here. Watching crime TV has a weak relationship with, having more fear, which has another weak relationship with how we feel about the police and our punitive attitudes. So yes, in the chain of events, they could have some relations to each other. There would be another study and other tests to try to tease that out, because you have a lot of disentangling to do to see what the direct and indirect effects are. But again, these are weak relationships, so are they really worth testing? Probably not. Other findings from the Dowler study were that there was a direct effect of crime show viewing on fear to be really weak. Other things kind of overpowered it and made more sense and covered more ground when it came to explaining that effect. And Dowler really did not include any social learning process variables that may have actually mediated the effect, which might really be responsible for explaining what's going on rather than this kind of weak relationship that we have. So we think maybe there were stronger variables that weren't tested or uncovered. There's one other study I want to bring to your attention. This is a study that was done by Lon Lanza-Caduci here in our department. And it was about the fear of crime among the elderly in Texas. Now, why would we care about studying this population? Well, you have to recognize that the elderly tend to watch TV, especially evening news, and they tend to live with some insecurity and vulnerability as far as their own victimization, worrying about being victimized and being targeted for crime. And so there are some population attributes that are worth studying when it comes to the elderly and the kind of harm that can fall upon them. So Lon Lanza-Caduci took a representative sample from the Texas Crime Poll. They actually introduced some of those social learning theory constructs like imitation, reinforcement, punishment, definitions, differential association as the major variables to see what was actually going on. And it used exposure to media accounts as a control variable, along with other demographic variables like race and sex and education and income, all the usual players that tend to also have an impact on it. And then they measured fear of crime using the worry and likelihood of victimization. Some of those classic questions like, are there places you'd be afraid to walk at night? Are you afraid of your neighbors? Do you feel like you live in a high crime area? Are you worried about defending yourself? Do you think you're likely to be victimized violently? And them agreeing or not agreeing or saying yes or no or whatnot. The study also looked at the effect of fear on taking crime precautions, of reducing your risk. Here are the findings from that study. So media exposure was related to both those measures of fear when they did all these bivariate analyses. When social learning constructs were included, media exposure wasn't related. So basically, when you introduce imitation and reinforcement and definitions, it basically zeroes out the effect of media exposure. So they can feel more certain in saying what's happening with the weak relationship with media exposure is really accounted for by the social learning process of reinforcement and imitation. By itself, it's not really doing anything. But through this mechanism of social learning, it is. So the relationship is only there when the social learning mechanisms are there. Differential association, definitions, and reinforcement or punishment of fear by family and friends explained the levels of fear. But media exposure itself was not related to taking crime precautions, but worrying about crime was. So seeing if watching a lot of crime TV actually had the outcome of people going out and buying security alarms and those kind of things, nope, no effect. But if they expressed emotions and worries and concerns about crime, then yes, that had a more direct prediction of they're going to go out and buy some stuff. So media by itself doesn't really do a lot when we study it empirically. So as far as study implications go, and as your Surratt text notes, the direct effect of media on crime is really probably weak at best. It is there, you will find it in some studies, but it's not a very strong variable, and it doesn't account for very much. If social learning variables are included when you do the analyses, the media effects may drop out because they're mediated by other processes that are stronger. And media may still be an important source of input, but the communications processed by friends and family have that major direct impact on us and influence our lives, our behaviors, our reinforcers, our cues much more intensely than watching crime TV. So while you might say, okay, class over, it's not important to study media and crime, there are lots of other effects that we need to take into account for this class. Things like policy implications and corrections and courts and wrongful conviction and witness protection and all these other kinds of things. So it's not just this part of the class that you might make a determination of, should I keep taking the class or not? Because here's the answer to my question. Is there an effect of media on crime? Yes, no, well, obviously no, or not very much. But there are a lot of other ways in which media is highly influential in criminology and in the criminal justice system. And so that's where our studies are going to take us into Module 3. So hopefully this helps share some findings, some research, and shed some light on things of where we stand and what we know. And I'll see you in Module 3.